So, what is contrast? Contrast is the state of being strikingly different from something else, typically something in juxtaposition or close association. If you consider two dimensional design in any medium or discipline, be it painting, photography, digital imagery, or another format, contrast allows us to see what we see. Let's take a look at contrast as it relates to some of the elements from the periodic table of colors: value, vibrancy, temperature, texture, shape, and I'll add complementary color to this discussion. Without contrast, we can't discern one thing from another. Let's start with value. Value is the relative lightness or darkness of a color. If you see this image and then look at it in value only, you are seeing the contrast of white against black or a shade of gray. The contrast is visible in this image as a result of light and shadow. What if we change the settings to see color vibrancy? Vibrancy is the relative saturation or intensity of a color. You can see now that the contrast is visible between not only the value, but a vibrant color against neutral color. The highest level of contrast is here, and the lowest level is here. If the color palette is shifted to consistently neutral colors, we perceive only the variation in value. Or now, a consistently and equally bright field of colors, it's much harder to discern the image, except through value variation. If we remove value as well, and all the colors are of equal value and intensity, or neutrality, discerning various parts of the image is nearly impossible. There's no contrast of any kind. Creating contrast with more than one element of color, as in value and saturation, makes an image vastly more interesting and gives you, the creator of the image, so much more to work with. Let's see what happens when we play with a variation in texture, temperature, some like it hot, some like it cold, shape, both size and contour matter, complements. Notice the contrast in this example of complementary colors is shown from light to shadow. We'll talk more about this in the discussion on color and light, but its effect on the image is clear. We can turn up the volume or turn it down, but the vibrant play of the opposite nature of complementary colors is the least understood and most potent points of contrast that you can use in an image. Understanding all of the ways that you can show contrasting elements of an image is only a starting point. We need to understand why viewers pay attention to it and how to control and hold the viewer's attention with contrast. I've identified that we need contrast to see an image, but what draws us in to create a reaction, and how does color affect this reaction? Let's start with shape and edge. When we're infants, we prefer to look at high contrast edges and patterns. As time passes, we're able to understand information from shape by what is implied, probably an important skill for our ancestors who needed to discern between friend and foe, creatures that are harmless, and ones that might enjoy you for dinner, and where solid ground begins and ends. As human beings, we also pay close attention to hard and soft shapes. Sharp pointed things remind us of what could cause harm, and soft edges remind us of human and organic forms, things that could sustain us in body and spirit. It is no surprise that as a viewer, we look at highest level of contrast first. Notice that we pay close attention to the bold words. Knowing this is essential to directing the viewer's attention through an image from highest level of contrast to lowest. What draws our attention first needs to be what's most important for the viewer to pay attention to. It's a visual clue, and we need to plant it wisely. Human beings pay attention to visual contrast and are drawn to it, so it's essential to learn how to use it to draw a viewer into an invented world. Hierarchy in an image is the order of priority for the viewer's focus. Establishing a hierarchy of contrast in value, vibrancy, temperature, texture, shape, and complementary relationships will provide a guide for the viewer to move around an image. If you can nudge someone to read your image in a particular way, then you have the power to keep them looking and perceiving longer. Establishing a focal point or area of highest contrast is the first order of business. So let's look at the focal points by examining where the eye travels through a Dutch masterpiece. Here's Vermeer's very famous Girl with a Pearl Earring. As we look at the painting, we can see that it has nice variation of values, making it, let's say, easy on the eyes. We can track the value system because there is one, remembering that value is the relative lightness or darkness of a color. Where is the focal point for you? How are you reading this image? I'll show you the path that my eyes follow. In this case, it seems clear that Vermeer wanted us to look first at the eyes, then down the contour of the face, then on the T of the collar and down the shoulder. He used the illusion of light to achieve a hierarchy of values. Now let's consider adding vibrancy to the mix. Vibrancy is the relative brightness or saturation of a color. What we see is that the vibrancy of color pulls our attention still to the areas of high value contrast, but a slightly different trajectory, with more focus on the red of the lips and the darkness of the eyes. We tend to move around the whole face because our eyes are shifting between two places, not simply focused on a singular point of interest. The turban plays a more active role in getting us to the face. The value contrast works with a contrast of vibrancy and hierarchy of vibrancy to direct our eyes where Vermeer wanted us to look. Instead of bouncing between the eyes and the shoulder, when seen only in value, we're tending to move a bit more around the form as a result of the contrast of vibrancy and the contrast of value together. Just for fun, let's add another potential area of contrast, that of temperature. Temperature is the warmth or relative coolness of a color. Contrasting hot against cool can create a hierarchy of contrast and a clear focal point in an image. Let's look at one of my favorite Golden Age illustrators, Maxfield Parrish. He used temperature contrast to great effect, not only to create an emotional expression, but to focus your eye within a piece. As we look at the female form, it's likely that we start at the rocks, as the contrast of value is high, but are quickly directed up along the contrast of temperature and value that exists in the figure. We may land on the face, a V shape of warmth in a field of cool color, the highest level of temperature and value contrast combined in the entire piece. The secondary level of contrast, the hair, draws our attention to the left, mirrored by the flowing drapery and mimicked again by the contrast of value and temperature in the clouds. The hierarchy is clear: female first, scenery second. The direction of hierarchy, what we look at first, second, and so on, is highly controlled by both temperature and value. In each of the paintings we've looked at, we've paid special attention to where our eyes travel throughout the piece and can see that hierarchy is not accidental, but well designed by each painter. As visual image makers, knowing where to direct the eye of the viewer gives us greater control over our ideas and expression of visual language. Establishing a hierarchy of contrast is not only useful in directing the viewer's eyes, but more importantly, can be used to direct their mind. Conveying content, now that is real power. Content is the meaning or significance of a literary or artistic work, the information or expression being communicated. With that in mind, let's see how it plays out with typography and photographic imagery. Here are a few design examples to demonstrate that a hierarchy of contrast exists in all types of images. The examples provided are from San Francisco design studio, The Hydrilla. Let's start with this poster, a truly excellent piece utilizing a hierarchy of value in its design. The viewer's eye is naturally drawn to the highest area of contrast, the white mask against the black coat and hair, and is directed by a use of directional pointer, in this case, the nose. We follow the contrast along the nose of the mask, taking in the general silhouette of the figure, and are directed towards the next most important element, the type or the title of the piece. The contrast is similar in value to the nose, coat, and hair relationship, But the quantity of white against black is made up of smaller shapes in the typography. Size or quantity of color does matter. We're drawn to larger shapes of contrast and color, or in this case, value, and move to smaller areas by degrees. The type is wisely designed to decrease in size and thus value contrast as we move to the bottom towards less significant content. Here's an example of temperature, value, and complementary contrast working in concert. The primary focus here is on the typography. The most important message, a cozy fireplace, is in a vibrant, highly saturated orange-yellow hue. Although chilly nights might be read first as the Western viewers start from left to right when reading, the attention is focused on the contrast of warmth in a field of blue. The eye is led to the actual fireplace or home and hearth symbol of three small pieces of orange and yellow in the house below. Notice that the color is a similar hue to the type above it, so that the eye will link the content intuitively. The viewer is then led to the next highest value contrast along the horizon to the type at the bottom, the name of the hotel. Again, the message of home and hearth is the most important content to convey to the viewer, with the actual name of the hotel second in level of importance. The hierarchy of contrast should demonstrate the order of importance of the information in a design. This last example, an album cover, demonstrates the power of vibrant, contrasting, complementary color. The red-green combination, in addition to helping direct the eye, assists in defining the mood and expression of personal style. As with the other examples that I've shown you, our attention starts with the contrast of texture, value, and a vibrant red hue in the artist's hat, hair, and face, which pulls our attention immediately to her. Our eyes are then allowed to circle around the silhouette of the form, and lastly, the type, her name. I asked the designer why the name is so lacking in contrast by comparison to all the other elements. He explained that this album cover only appears online and with a group of other albums on a website page that features her name prominently at the top. If this album were a standalone for print, the name would clearly have a more prominent position in the hierarchy of contrasting elements. When your content, color, and contrast work in concert, you can conquer the world, or at least be a more effective visual communicator.